Well, hello, and welcome back to another episode of Presentation DNA, the series where we're trying to unlock the genetic code, the principles, if you like, of great presentation. Now, we're quite a long way into this series, and if you haven't seen the previous videos, what comes next probably won't make as much sense as it should. So if you'd like to catch up, why don't you click on the card at the top right of your screen there. That will take you to a YouTube playlist and you can watch all the videos that come before this one. Then everything should make sense. Now, in this episode, we're starting to move into presentation slide design. And I've called this episode The Art of Slides. And it's a bit of a play on words because, yes, your slides should look like a piece of art. But also, this is an art, not a science. There are not rigid rules. There is no 10 commandments of presentation that guarantee you fantastic slides. But there are definitely principles which, if you follow them, will make your slides more attractive, more magnetic, and more useful as you try and convince your audience of your conclusion. So really, in this episode, I just want to make 2 points, and then I'm going to unpack them a little bit, and then in future videos, we'll dive deeper into these 2 aspects of slide design. So the first thing is my slide attractive? And by attractive, does it make me want to look at it? Will it make my audience want to look at it? If it's not attractive, there's no real point in putting that up on a screen in front of your audience. And secondly, is it coherent? Can the eyes of my audience decode what that slide is trying to do? Does it make sense to them? Is it backing up my oral message, or is it at odds with it? If I wasn't speaking, would people have any idea about my subject just by looking at my slide? And the principle that we need to bear in mind here is that attractiveness buys attention. And that's the thing that we desperately need. We need people to focus their mind on our presentation. And they're not going to do that without good reason. So an attractive slide will buy people's attention and hopefully hold it. So we have to ask ourselves, how is it that the people are going to keep looking at this slide for the length of time it takes me to talk about this slide? So if I'm going to talk about this slide for 3 seconds, then it hasn't got a difficult job in terms of holding their attention. But if I'm going to talk for 5 minutes over this slide, it jolly well better have something about it that makes people want to watch that slide for 5 minutes. Now, maybe they should be watching you at a certain point, but still, for at least some of the time that you're talking, this slide has got to hold their attention. So the question is, will it? And then coherence buys understanding. So if what's on the screen is backing up what I'm saying, that's the most likely that people will remember some key element of what I've said. So it's a double act between your voice and what's up on the screen behind you. And if it's coherent, if it's easy for people's eyes to decode, then that's going to do a better job of backing up your words than if the slide is confusing or fragmented or just not at all clear what it's trying to do. So in terms of attractiveness, we could call it eye pull. What will pull people's eyes onto this slide and then keep them there? And there's various factors that we're going to talk about over the next few videos. One is the layout or the use of space, including dead space. You don't want to fill the slide from corner to corner because that just gets a little bit overwhelming. It should draw people's eyes in a relaxed manner, and our layout can really help them follow the logic of what this slide is trying to do. Choice of fonts can make a big difference to that. Ratios and proportions are really important in magnetic slide design, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. The use of color is huge. There is a language of color. It's not the same in every country in the world, but color is a good way of backing up what we're saying so that it's easy for people to see. These are my main points. These are my secondary points. This is key data. This is backup data. And then, of course, using pictures and using them well can make a massive, massive difference to whether or not it's a good slide design. And actually, we should think about every one of our slides basically being a picture. So imagine if you printed out your slide, framed it and hung it on the wall in front of people but didn't speak. what would they do? Would they look at it? Would they keep looking at it? Or would they just go, what is that? And just look somewhere else? So every slide, when it's finished building and all of the animations are finished, should look attractive. And it only takes a little bit of time and thought on this to make the difference between a really horrible slide and a really great slide. And it's not as complicated as you may think. We just need to follow some principles and we'll be fine. But what we want is some beautiful slides where people actually enjoy looking at them while they're listening to you. So we'll talk more about how to turn your slides into artwork, but those are the key principles, and those elements that we just talked about are each one of them we might want to think through and say, okay, how am I going to choose my fonts and my colors, and which pictures am I going to use, and how can I cook those all together so that I get a nice, coherent, attractive image. Now, in terms of coherence, these are really visual clues, if you like. So without me speaking, will the eyes of my audience be able to work out any clues on my slide as to where things are going? So if you look at the slide that you can see right now, it's just got 6 boxes. They're all round-edged squares. So what will the eyes of my audience assume in terms of priority and hierarchy and importance? So in the Western Hemisphere, we read from top left to bottom right. So probably in the absence of any other structure on my slide, people's eyes will assume that they should start at the top left corner and work their way across the top row and then come back to the left-hand edge of the bottom row and scan across that. If we're in the Eastern Hemisphere, if people are reading from right to left, then the same principle applies, but obviously it will be flipped. So even if you don't think you've put hierarchy into your slides, people's brains will assume that you have, and in the absence of anything else, they're going to scan just like they do when they're reading the page of a book. Now, that might be fine, in which case, just leave it as it is. That's what you want them to do. All is well. But just think about it. Even if you don't think you've designed the hierarchy, people's brains are going to make assumptions about it anyway. Use of color, we've already mentioned that, but just by coloring one of the squares a different color to all the others, everybody's eye will assume that that's the starting point and or that that's your most important point. So again, just coloring one element is a message. It's a visual clue for our audience to say, start here, or this is the big point, or this is the bit you really need to remember. We can do the same thing just with size. The biggest one will be assumed to be the most important. It will be assumed to be the top of the hierarchy. Or even if we don't play with the size, we can just do it with the layout. So in the slide as you're seeing it now, people will assume that that point all by itself is more important and should be the first compared to all the others on the slide. We can take that a step further even and cluster the information. So now it's clear we've got a starting point, top left, and then we've got a cluster of 3 points that are connected in some way. And then we've got a separate cluster of 2 points, which are also connected in some way to each other. That's much easier for the eye to follow than if we do this, which has basically got no visual clues at all. What is the meaning of that? How does my eye work out where it's supposed to go and what this slide is trying to do? And again, in the absence of anything else, it'll probably just assume top left and scan across to bottom right, but it doesn't look coherent. It looks fragmented, and that will set up a little bit of visual tension, which won't help us. Same thing, using colors is great, but there needs to be some logic to the colors that we use. It doesn't have to be complicated logic, but on this slide, maybe people will assume that the blue of the top left square, because it's the same as the blue we've used for the word coherence, maybe there's a connection there, and maybe there's some sort of connection between the red square and the fact that we've crossed out the words visual clues. But as to the rest of it, they're just colours. Hopefully they're nice colours that work well together, but we're not clear on what is trying to happen on this slide. So just a starter to get you thinking. The worst thing that you can do is just lob all your material onto a slide and then show it to your audience. Filling your slide with text is a horrible thing to do as well. Please don't do that to your audiences. And just start off by saying, okay, what simple principles can I follow that means even without me explaining the slide, the audience will be able to decode to some degree at least what my slide is doing. And the more harmonious that is with what I'm saying, the better the outcome and the effect of my presentation will be. So in future videos, we're going to dig deep onto a few things like that. I'm going to show you how I go through my process for laying out slides and why I do some of the things that I do with my visuals. Now, I'm not saying I'm right and everybody else is wrong. It isn't black and white, wrong and right, good and bad, but there's definitely better and worse. And it's worth starting with a framework and then you can adapt it and make it your own from there. So that's what's going to come on next. So hopefully that's been helpful to you. And if it has, would you consider going to buymeacoffee.com/Mark Buchanan and buy me a coffee? That just helps me offset the cost of the gear and the time it takes to make these videos. So I've enjoyed being with you on this one. I hope you have too. And we'll see you on the next one.